Good morning, students. Welcome to this class on Middle English literature. From exam point of view, this module is very important. So we'll be discussing the Norman Conquest, its impact, and the literature of this period in this class. Middle English period began with the Norman Conquest in 1066 AD and it ended with the Renaissance. With the death of Edward the Confessor, there was a question of succession, and Harold II assumed the throne, but there were two other rivals as well. One is the King of Norway, and the other one was the Duke of Normandy, William. So these two people, they invaded England. Harold II succeeded in defeating the King of Norway, but he couldn't defeat William of Normandy. And the Duke of Normandy, this William, he invaded England and defeated Harold II and became William the Conqueror and became the ruler of England. So this is the political background that you need to know before going into the Middle English literature. So now, who is the king in England? William the Conqueror, William the Duke of Normandy. Normandy, a place in France. So he came to England not alone. He came along with his French nobles and aristocracy, and he made drastic changes in the English society. Not only in the society, we find changes in literature and in language as well. So mainly the Middle English society was affected by this Norman Conquest. So this is called Norman Conquest. The conquest of England by William of Normandy in 1066 AD in the Battle of Hastings. Is it clear? So this is the political background. And when he came to England, he actually made a strong centralized government, and he brought with him the French feudal system. But at the same time, he made many reforms which actually, in order to check the power of the nobles, because in this feudal system, the nobles, they had enormous power, and some nobles were more powerful than the king, and they could start civil wars and they could revolt against the king. So in order to check the power of the nobles, this William of Normandy, he made a few reforms. He made certain changes in the feudal system, and he introduced, there are three things that we need to know. You need to study from exam point of view. One is Doomsday Book, another one Oath of Salisbury, and the curfew law. So these are the three main things that he introduced in order to check the power of the nobles. So when he came to England, he replaced the English nobles with the French nobles, and they were given land, but at the same time he made a record of the land holdings of every person in England. A kind of survey book, the sheep, the number of cattle that they had. There was a book, a document made, and it is called Doomsday Book. And the name suggests, it alludes to the final judgment day. When God will reward the good and punish the evil, the judgment day, when the judgment is final. So likewise, what is written in this book, this document is final and it's accurate, and nobody can go against it. There is no appeal against it, and that is why it is called Doomsday Book. That is one method that he introduced in order to check the power of the nobles. Then there is this Oath of Salisbury, in which, through which he actually made the tenants, the vassals, and other peasants, pay loyalty to the king alone. They took oath of loyalty towards the king and not towards the noble. And by curfew law, he forbid these nobles gathering together and revolting against the king. So no conspiracy were encouraged. It was not possible for the nobles to do that. So these are a few things that he made. The changes that he introduced in the feudal system in order to check the power of the nobles. So that is one important change or impact of Norman conquest in England. And then in church also, similar reforms were made in order to check the power of the church, because the church exercised excessive power even over the king in England till then. And he made certain laws, and no papal bills were passed before, without his consent. So and also he forbade the clergy to marry, and there were many other reforms that he introduced in the church in order to curb the power of the church. So that is also another important thing that he has brought into the English society. And coming to the language, he brought along with him the French nobles and also the French aristocracy. So normally the language of French was commonly used in England at that point of time, and French became the language of the court. But at the same time, Latin was the language of the church, and English was mainly used only by the peasants there, the commoners. And the dialect which was popular at that point of time was, the dialect used was East Midland dialect. And in the court, it was French which was used commonly. And at the same time, this French language enriched the vocabulary of English language as well. Many words that we use today also came during this Norman period from the French language, words like baron, duke, beef, mutton, pork, captain, lieutenant, all these words are of French origin. It is as a result of this Norman conquest. And coming to literature as also, we find certain influences, lasting influences in English literature. One is the influence of French metrical romances. English literature was enriched by these metrical romances and fables and satires as well. So, as a whole, if we take this Norman conquest, it has got an enormous and lasting impact in the English society, in forming a centralized government, in forming a kind of disciplined or kind of a standard to everything, to language, to literature and everything. And coming to this literature part, we can broadly divide this medieval literature, Middle English literature, into two broad categories. One is the first half, literature of the Norman period, and the second half is called literature in the age of Chaucer. So we have got two broad categories. One is, what is the first one? That is the literature of the Norman period, and the second period is age of Chaucer. So we need to understand the popular genres and works during this period. And coming to the Norman period, the popular genres were metrical romances, elegies, fables and satire, ballads, historical works, and also there were religious works as well. So we'll see a few examples of these metrical romances. It was as a direct influence of French literature. So these French metrical romances like Roman de la Rose and other works, influenced the English writers in England. And many romances came out during this period about the lives of kings, legendary kings in Britain, especially the life of King Lear, King Arthur. The important example is this story of this King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. So actually a French metrical, or this metrical romance, is a long rambling poem, where you have a knight, very courageous knight who is fighting for a damsel, fighting for his lover. There is a damsel in distress, and there is this fighting. There are supernatural elements as well, some dragons or some, and this knight will fight with it. So this is a normal plot for metrical romance. So we have many famous English metrical romances. One is the Legends of King Arthur. We have King Havelock, King Huon, and many other romances are there. Coming to elegy, as you all know, it's a poem of lament. And the famous elegy during this period is Pearl. Pearl is an elegy where a father laments the death of his daughter, and he envisages his daughter in heaven having leading a very joyous life with God, and he is grieving for the death of his daughter. So this is a very famous elegy during this period, Pearl. And we have got fables and satires. That was, during this period, French satires were, writers were imitating French satires and fables. And in England, we have a famous satire, fable, the story of Owl and the Nightingale. It's actually a long debate between these two birds, an owl and a nightingale, one representing the lighter side of life and the other the sterner side of law. So similarly, we have many other fables as well as satires, like the owl and this is Owl and the Nightingale, and other examples are the fox and the wolf, and you have the Land of Cocaine. These are all famous satires modeled after French satires and fables. And one more thing that you need to notice, all these works, metrical romances, fables and satires, elegies, these are actually targeted for the aristocracy, the aristocratic readers. And commoners were not that engaged with these works. One main thing is many of them were written in French. And coming to another genre, ballads, it was targeted for the commoners. And there were many ballads which were compiled and which were composed by wandering minstrels. And common people, they tend to use it and pass it to the next generation orally. We have got medieval ballads like Chevy Chase, Sir Patrick Spence, and you have the story of the Nut Brown Maid. All these ballads, were very popular during that time, and it was passed orally. And later on, we have literary ballads, modeled after these traditional ballads. So it was targeted for the common people. And then we have historical works, especially Lyman's Brut, that is the history of England, episodes of British kings like King Lear, King Arthur were given in detail. That is a historical record. And then we have religious, we have section, or we have a group of a few writers who wrote religious works during that time, especially Orm's Ormulum is very famous. We have to mention that because it is a metrical paraphrase of the Gospels, and that was also for the common people. The 4 Gospels in the Bible were paraphrased in verse form, without alliteration and refrains and repetition, without any rhyme. It was translated. It was paraphrased for the common people. So these are the popular genres that we find in the first half of the medieval English period or the Norman period. And second half, that is the age of Chaucer, which is the latter half. And during this period, we have got 3 main writers. One is Geoffrey Chaucer himself, and then John Gower and William Langland. So you need to know about these 3 writers and their contribution to English literature. Coming to Geoffrey Chaucer, he is the father of English poetry, and his literary life can be divided into 3 periods. One is the English period, French period, and Italian period. So, when we analyze his literary contribution, we find that the first period, that is the French period, where he was experimenting, starting to write. He imitated the French writers. He translated the French romance, Roman de la Rose, and he was actually imitating the French writers. And the famous one is this translation that appeared during this period. And the second period, Italian period, he was actually influenced by the Italian masters like Dante and Boccaccio. It was as a result of his visit to Italy. And he met these great masters, and he was attracted by their works. And he wrote House of Fame, The Legend of Good Women, Troilus and Cressida, during this period, that is the Italian period, when he wrote in Italian, he used Italian language as well in between. But the last one actually gave him a crowning, that was a period, which changed the course of English literature, because he resorted to write in East Midland dialect, the English used by that time. And he wrote this Canterbury Tales in English and the language of the commoners. And he is also called the father of English poetry. This Canterbury Tales is a very important and also very interesting collection of stories. And if you have time, please go to the library and get this collection of stories and read it. They are wonderful, interesting stories. And we'll see the background of this work, the Canterbury Tales. During the medieval period, and it was a tradition to go for pilgrimage. You're familiar with pilgrimages, right? People go to certain holy places for pilgrimage. So it was popular, it was customary for the medieval people to go to the shrine of St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury every year, every spring season. And here we have a group of pilgrims going together on the horseback to this shrine of St. Thomas Becket, and on the way they stopped at an inn, Tabard Inn at Southwark, and the innkeeper also joined them, and he offered a free lunch for the person who narrates the best story on the way and back home. So that is how we have got a collection of stories. So these pilgrims, and around 29 pilgrims were there. So they started narrating stories, and Chaucer gave an introduction to these pilgrims, as a prologue. And that is actually a very important document, a cross section of medieval society, you can say. You have the clerk of Oxford, nuns, friars, monks, and many like you have a knight, a squire. So we find people from different walks of the society represented in the prologue. Dryden says, it's actually God's plenty that we find in this Canterbury Tales, in the prologue. So this is very important historical document as well, which give a glance to, or a glimpse of medieval life and society. But another important thing that we need to know about Chaucer is that he was detached from the storms of the world. At that point of time, England was in turmoil. The Black Death was there. England was affected by plague. Peasants' revolt was happening. He was not actually concerned about any of this. He didn't really touch about these things in his works. But coming to other writers, John Gower and also William Langland, they touched all these social evils and also social problems in their writings, especially William Langland, who criticized the corrupt ecclesiastical setup then, the corrupt church, Catholic church, which was corrupted during that time. And he is actually his work was targeted for the common people, and he's famous for Pius the Plowman, a dream allegory. You find the protagonist, a plowman, resting on the Malvern Hills, and he falls asleep, and we have got a series of dreams, and the plot line goes along with these dreams. It's actually an allegory, it's a political and social allegory, a religious allegory as well. He attacks the corrupt clergy of that time, and those things are foregrounded in Pius the Plowman. John Gower, another leading figure, he also talked about the peasant revolt, especially in his work, Vox Clamantis. He wrote 3 works. One is Speculum Meditandus, second, that is in French. Then Vox Clamantis in Latin, and Confessio Amandus in English. So these are the 3 major works of John Gower, one in French, one in Latin, and the other in English. Actually, he thought that, he wanted to translate the last one also either into French or Latin, because he thought that, that one English, if he uses English, people won't accept it. But on the contrary, it was the work written in English which became very popular then. So the first one, this Specula Meditandus, which is written in French, is about 7 deadly sins. During this medieval period, the church brought this concept of 7 deadly sins, sins like lust, avarice, jealousy, and envy, gluttony, not jealousy, envy, gluttony, then sloth, wrath. So these are the 7 deadly sins which church, the concept that was popularized by the church. And the first work, the Specula Meditandus, is about these 7 deadly sins. The second one, Vox Clamandus, is actually about the peasant revolt during that time in the year 1381. That is Vox Clamandus. And the last one, Confessio Amantis, is actually about the consequences of these 7 deadly sins. What were the impact or effect of these 7 deadly sins in human beings. So these are the 3 major works of John Gower. Talk about the second half, the age of Chaucer. These 3 literary figures tower during this period. One is Geoffrey Chaucer, William Langland, and who's the third one? John Gower. So apart from this, what we find is, we find the origin of drama also during this period. If you are asked to write an essay on the literature of the medieval period, you have to write something about this literature of the Norman period, the genres and the works. You have to mention the age of Chaucer, these 3 writers and their works. And also you have to include this drama as well, this origin of drama, how drama originated during this medieval period, and a few examples that we will be dealing in detail in the next class, origin of drama. So for today's class, I think it is clear, right? The age of Chaucer and the Norman period, and also the impact of impact of Norman conquest. So please learn these concepts, these things from exam point of view also. Please go through the reading materials posted in Google Classroom, and then you can just summarize these things. You need to write about Norman conquest. What is Norman conquest? That what are the impact, or describe the impact of Norman conquest in the during the Middle English period. And then the essay, Middle English period literature of the Middle English period. So please go through these 3 questions, and also a few short answer questions. Maybe for 2 marks you can expect questions on Doomsday Book, Curfew Law, or Oath of Salisbury, or on Canterbury Tales. Of course, maybe you can get a short answer on Canterbury Tales, French romances. So please read through the reading material as well, which is posted in Google Classroom. And if you have any doubts, please ask me. We'll discuss when we meet next. Thank you. Have a good day.